All the lies the president and his enablers on right-wing media have been spreading about the election, and especially Dominion and the Smartmatic voting machines, it is causing those companies to threaten legal action now. In a preemptive move, Fox aired an interview on a few of its shows debunking a lot of the things that it's been saying in those very programs. Take a listen.
Lots of opinions about the integrity of the election, the irregularities of mail-in voting, of election voting machines and voting software. One of the companies is Smartmatic, and we reached out to one of the leading authorities on open source software for elections, Eddie Perez, for his insight and views.
I have not seen any evidence that Smartmatic software was used to delete, change, alter anything related to vote tabulation.
By the way, the show then went right to a commercial break after the interview so that Dobbs didn't have to say anything or even acknowledge. In fact, all the garbage he was spewing was just that. And in a separate suit, an employee at Dominion, again, that's one of the manufacturers of these voting machines, named Eric Coomer, he is suing the Trump campaign plus some of the right-wing media folks and those outlets for defamation, saying he has been named as a key figure in the lies behind the spread about the election fraud and also now is getting death threats. I bring the guys back in and, you know, we joke, fake news has become a common, go-to line here all the time, Mayo, but there's always a question as to whether or not anything can really be done about it. Now we're starting, because of the real tangible threats to even people's lives, to see possible suits. What kind of exposure? We talk about libel and slander all the time, but what kind of exposure could these companies be facing here, especially if they're putting people in danger?
Well, in many libel and slander cases, very limited damages. In a case like this, the damages can be through the sky, because what you have is verifiable false statements that were made to the world on behalf of these networks. And then you have people who relied upon the statements that were made by these networks to form opinions about the company and to go after individuals who actually work at Dominion and to threaten their lives. So far, to my knowledge, nobody's been physically harmed, but that could change at any moment.
And then, Jimmy, we get to the folks making arguments for the campaigns, even with false information. I'm talking about, obviously, Rudy Giuliani and crew. Forget that they're, batting, less than, 1 for 100 here, it seems, in terms of their cases. The fact of the matter remains, they'll say one thing on the courtroom steps, but when they get in front of a judge, all of a sudden, they don't allege fraud because they have no evidence, and they could be held in contempt here or face some real disciplinary actions consequently. Folks like Congressman Pascrell and others are saying there's got to be a price to be paid. Well, we talked about the companies maybe having lawsuits against them with real damages. These guys should not be able to call themselves attorneys anymore. They should be disbarred here for the unprofessional behavior. What do you think about that? Should people be stripped of law licenses if they knowingly are peddling dishonesty and then singing a completely different tune once they have to say something under oath?
Well, the question is what they say in their legal documents that they submit to court, in affidavits and affirmations, and what they argue before courts. And certainly there are disciplinary actions that can be taken when you appear before a court, whether on paper or in person, and you argue something that you know to be false. You are making material misrepresentations to the court as you're stating them as facts.
But what about, Jimmy, what about if they'll say something on the courtroom steps, alleging fraud, alleging all these things, but then when they have to go in the courtroom, they say something completely different when the cameras aren't rolling. Is there, in terms of, a duty, an ethical duty here, forget about whether they're prosecutable, but, you have a license and you have to abide by certain codes of conduct. Aren't they violating that?
Look, lawyers say things on courtroom steps. They go beyond oftentimes what they would say in court. The question is whether they're making material misrepresentations in court. I would note here that in several of these lawsuits, there were fraud allegations made in the papers, and then when they stood before the court, they withdrew them because there was no basis for them. That's the type of thing that can be actionable through the disciplinary process.
You know, guys, we lost not only a friend to the program, but also a friend for all the folks who knew him. And I'm talking about Bill Aronwald, the former federal prosecutor. He sat at this table countless times. He was 79, and, you know, there's a lot I knew about him, guys, but there's also a lot I learned since his passing. You know, he was on that Hofstra undefeated football team back in '59. He was in the Army. He was an ADA in Manhattan. He joined the Justice Department. He was with this Joint Strike Force that brought a ton of mob-related crimes. In fact, he ran it at a certain point. He worked at the Justice Department, and then he went into private practice, and he defended some of those same folks in the second chapter of his career, and also some high-profile cases, like, for example, the Carolyn Warmus case or the Kerry Kennedy case. He lived a full life, didn't he?
He did.
Absolutely.
He was a fierce advocate on both sides. He was, you know, you talk about dignity and integrity in the courtroom, which we just talked about a few minutes ago, and he was a pillar of that integrity and dignity. He was a fierce advocate, and most of all, he was a good man.
You know, Mayo, there was a story about Aronwald I can't believe. I knew the story, but I didn't put two and two together. As I mentioned before, he had a lot of mob-related cases, and in fact, when he was in private practice, he was representing, as I understood, an informant against the mob. They put a hit out on him, and they killed his father accidentally when they were targeting him. They got the wrong Aronwald. It took years to trace it back because the organized crime family had ended up killing the two guys who had botched the hit, and then also the person who carried out the hit, even on those guys. But eventually, justice was served. But an amazing story and hugely notable at the time.
I think it's such a tremendous story, and it just accentuates what a wonderful person Bill was to begin with, and one of the most talented lawyers I've ever met, that I've ever worked with. Just a wonderful person to know. And the integrity, as Jim said, was beyond reproach. And I mean, we could certainly use more people like Bill Aronwald today. And as great of an attorney that he was an even better individual.
And that's a good note to end on. Hey, guys, as always, thank you for the time, and have a great holidays for yourselves, all right?
You as well.
You as well.
Thank you, guys. All right, folks, we come back. We'll put a bow on this program. Stay with us.